Imagine this. It's March 8, 2014. A Boeing 777, flight MH370, takes off from Kuala Lumpur, bound for Beijing. On board, 239 people. And then, poof, nothing. Just gone. Vanished into thin air, seemingly.
It's the stuff of nightmares, isn't it? Like a ghost story, but with a real, modern plane and 239 souls on board. And honestly, it still gives me chills thinking about it. How can a plane that massive, with all that tech, just disappear?
That's the core question, isn't it, Ivy? We live in an age where we can track our pizza delivery with pinpoint accuracy, but a Boeing 777, one of the most advanced passenger jets in the sky, just vanishes. No distress call, no wreckage found for years, not even a definitive, here's what happened.
Exactly. So, for nearly a decade now, the world has been gripped by this mystery. And there are so many theories floating around, some more plausible than others, but none of them fully satisfying. Today, we're going to dive into the top contenders, trying to make sense of the unimaginable.
I think the one that haunts a lot of people, and it's a really difficult one to talk about, is the idea of pilot suicide, the rogue pilot scenario, because it suggests a deliberate act that caused all this suffering.
Right, and there's some unsettling evidence that points in that direction, even if it's circumstantial. The fact that the transponder was manually turned off, the ACARS system, which sends automatic messages about the plane's health, was also deactivated.
And that distinct turn, a sharp westward deviation from its planned flight path, just as it was crossing into Vietnamese airspace. That's not something an autopilot error usually does. It implies a conscious, deliberate action at the controls.
Then there's the goodnight Malaysian 370 transmission from Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah. It was so casual, so routine. But in retrospect, knowing what happened next, it takes on this incredibly ominous tone, doesn't it?
That's where the flight simulator comes in too. Investigators found that Captain Zahari had simulated a flight deep into the southern Indian Ocean, very similar to the eventual flight path of MH370, on his home simulator just weeks before the actual flight. That's a pretty damning piece of evidence for many people.
It is, but then on the flip side you have his family, his friends, who painted a picture of a loving father and a highly respected pilot. No obvious signs of distress, no known mental health issues that were public. It's incredibly hard for people to reconcile that image with the idea of him deliberately crashing a plane.
And think about the human element. If he did do that, he wasn't just ending his own life, but taking 238 other people with him. It's a level of malevolence that's almost impossible to comprehend. That's why I think so many people struggle with this theory, despite the evidence.
Plus, the simulator data itself has been debated. Some argue it was just a hobbyist exploring different scenarios, which pilots do. It wasn't an exact match either, just a similar route. But the timing is certainly eyebrow-raising.
So, if it wasn't the pilot, what else could it be? Another prominent theory, often linked to the idea of deliberate action, is remote hijacking or a cyber attack. The idea that someone from the ground or even another person on board took control.
This one is fascinating from a technological standpoint. Modern planes are essentially flying computers. There are theoretical ways to gain access to flight systems, though it's incredibly complex and requires a high level of expertise.
But for what purpose? A traditional hijacking usually involves demands or a destination. This plane just disappeared. No demands ever came. No group claimed responsibility. That's what makes it so different from other hijacking scenarios we've seen.
Exactly. If it was a hijacking to nowhere, or rather to the bottom of the Indian Ocean. That doesn't fit the usual MO. And if it was a cyber attack, how would that explain the manual turning off of the transponder and ACARS? Those are physical switches, not just software toggles.
Well, you could argue that if someone had gained full control of the flight deck, they could then manually turn those off. The challenge is the lack of any evidence of external interference. No communications intercepted, no digital footprint pointing to an attack.
It feels a bit too Hollywood, doesn't it? While I understand the fear, the idea of someone remotely taking over a plane and just making it vanish without a trace, it requires a huge leap of faith without any solid evidence backing it up.
Okay, so what if it wasn't a deliberate act by anyone? What if it was an accident? This brings us to theories like a catastrophic fire, structural failure, or even incapacitation of the crew due to depressurization.
A fire is a terrifying possibility, especially if it started in the cargo hold, which is notoriously difficult to access or fight mid-flight. If a fire incapacitated the crew, the plane could have flown on autopilot until it ran out of fuel.
We've seen incidents like that before, right? Where a fire or some other catastrophic event knocks out the crew, and the plane just flies on, a ghost plane, until it eventually crashes. That's a very real and horrifying scenario.
Absolutely. Think of something like the Swissair Flight 111 incident in '98, where an electrical fire led to the crew becoming incapacitated, and the plane crashed. But again, with MH370, you have that manual turning off of the communication systems. A fire, while devastating, doesn't typically cause someone to calmly switch off the transponder.
Unless the fire was so intense, so rapid, that the crew in their last moments made some desperate, unrecorded attempt to prevent further systems damage, or even tried to turn around, and then succumbed. But that's a lot of what-ifs.
And the depressurization theory, like Helios Airways Flight 522, where the crew became incapacitated due to lack of oxygen, and the plane flew on autopilot until it ran out of fuel and crashed. Could that have happened to MH370?
It's plausible up to a point. If the cabin rapidly depressurized, the pilots wouldn't have much time to react. They might have tried to turn back or descend, but if they lost consciousness, the plane could have continued on its last commanded course. But again, the manual shutdown of systems is the sticking point.
That's why the ghost flight theory, where the plane flies on autopilot with everyone incapacitated, struggles with the transponder and ACARs being turned off. That requires human intervention. If everyone was out cold, those systems would likely remain on until power failed or they hit the water.
So we keep coming back to that single point of human intervention. It makes you wonder if there was someone conscious and in control, at least for that critical period.
Which brings us back to either the pilot or someone else in the cockpit. Another theory, a variation of the pilot action, is an unlawful interference by another person on board, perhaps a passenger with hostile intent.
This is where the perfect storm scenario often comes into play. A highly skilled individual with aviation knowledge somehow gains access to the cockpit, takes control, and then executes this elaborate plan to disappear the plane. But the manifest was checked. No suspicious passengers were flagged.
And wouldn't there have been a struggle, some sign of a forced entry? You'd think that would be picked up, even if only by a flight attendant trying to intervene. The lack of any such evidence makes this one feel less likely, though not impossible.
So we've got deliberate action by the pilot, or deliberate action by someone else, or a catastrophic accident. But what ties a lot of these together, or makes them so frustratingly hard to prove, is how this plane was tracked, or rather untracked, in the first place.
This is where the satellite pings become crucial. After the transponder and ACARs were off, the plane effectively vanished from civilian radar. But there's this company called Inmarsat, which operates satellites that communicate with planes.
The handshakes, right? These automated pings between the plane and the satellite, even when no active communication is happening. They're like a little "I'm still here" signal.
Precisely. And based on the timing and angle of these pings, Inmarsat was able to calculate an arc of uncertainty, basically a curve on the map where the plane likely was when it sent its last signals. This arc stretched deep into the southern Indian Ocean.
And that's why the search efforts were concentrated in that incredibly remote, hostile part of the world. Thousands of square kilometers, billions of dollars spent, and for a long time, nothing. Just vast, empty ocean.
It's a testament to the power of those satellite pings, though, that they were able to narrow it down at all. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had even a vague idea of where to look. But still, the ocean is so incredibly vast and deep.
It really highlights the limitations of our current tracking technology, especially over oceanic areas where ground-based radar is useless. There's a push now for real-time tracking of all commercial flights, which MH370 certainly accelerated.
Some wreckage eventually did turn up, years later. Parts of the plane, notably a flaperon, washed up on Réunion Island and other coastlines thousands of miles from the assumed crash site. This confirmed the plane did indeed go down in the Indian Ocean.
But even that brought little closure, did it? It confirmed the end, but not the how or the why. It just reinforced the tragedy for the families, knowing their loved ones were indeed lost, but still no answers to the fundamental questions.
That's the real gut punch. Finding a piece of debris tells you it crashed, which was already largely assumed. It doesn't tell you if it was an uncontrolled dive or a deliberate, controlled ditching, which some theories suggest. And the state of the wreckage could potentially indicate that.
Right. If the plane was deliberately glided down or drenched into the water, the wreckage might be more concentrated, less scattered. A high-speed impact would tear it to shreds. The available wreckage hasn't definitively answered that, though some analyses have tried to infer the angle of impact.
It's just so frustrating, isn't it, to have all this technology, all this expertise, and still not be able to definitively say what happened to an entire plane. It's almost humbling in a very dark way.
It's also a wake-up call for the aviation industry. Since MH370, there's been a push for better emergency beacon technology, improved black box battery life, and more constant data streaming from aircraft. The goal is that a plane should never just vanish again.
And that's perhaps the most lasting legacy of MH370, beyond the tragedy itself. It exposed a significant blind spot in global air traffic management. Even in 2014, with all our advancements, a huge airliner could effectively opt out of being tracked.
The families are still fighting for answers, too. They've been through so much, the uncertainty, the years of hoping, then the realization. It's a weight that I can't even imagine, and not knowing the why makes it so much harder to process.
I think that's why these theories persist and why people keep discussing them. Everyone wants closure, especially for the families. And until the black boxes are found or the main wreckage is definitively located and examined, that closure feels out of reach.
So we're left with an almost unbearable mystery. Was it the pilot? Was it some unforeseen, catastrophic event? Was it something we haven't even considered yet? The truth is, we don't know, and the silence from the deep ocean floor continues to echo.
And it reminds us in a very stark way that even with all our technological marvels, there are still corners of our world and perhaps even our human psyche that remain utterly unfathomable. MH370 is a chilling testament to that.
It's a stark reminder, yes, and a challenge for engineers and investigators worldwide to ensure that no aircraft and no lives ever disappear like that again. The lessons learned, though tragic, are critical.
Absolutely. It's a case that continues to baffle and sadden us, and it will likely remain one of aviation's most enduring and haunting enigmas until or if those definitive answers ever surface. Thanks for exploring this complex topic with us today, Ivy and Zoe.
Thanks, RJ. It's a tough one, but an important one to keep talking about.
Always. Hopefully one day we'll have a more complete story to tell. Until then, stay curious.